Upon a time, in a land called Hanover, there was a family who would become kings and queens. This family was called the House of Hanover. It all started with a man named George. George was born in 1660 in Germany. He was smart, brave, and ready to lead. In 1714, something amazing happened. Queen Anne of England died, and she had no children to take the throne. So the people of England chose George to be their king. He became King George I. George I was new to England and didn't speak English very well, but he worked hard to be a good king. He ruled wisely and helped England become stronger. George I had a son named George II. When George I died in 1727, his son became King George and King George II. I loved music and helped make London a very exciting place to live. He was brave and even fought in battle. He also had a big family with many children. George I had a son named Frederick, but sadly, Frederick died before he could become king. So when George I died in 1760, Frederick's son George I became king. King George I was just 22 years old. He was very interested in farming and science. He loved his country and wanted to make it better. But during his reign, the American colonies fought for their independence and became a new country called the United States. King George I had many children, including a son named George. When George I became very ill, his son helped rule the country. In 1820, when George I died, his son became King George IV. George IV loved beautiful things and spent a lot of money on fancy buildings. And after George IV, his brother William became king. William was called King William IV. He was a sailor before he became king and was known as the Sailor King. He tried to be a fair and good king. William had no children, so when he died in 1837, his niece Victoria became Queen. Victoria was one of the most famous queens in history. She became queen when she was just 18 years old. Victoria loved her country and worked very hard. She married a prince named Albert, and they had 9 children. Victoria ruled for 63 years, which is a very long time. During her reign, England became very powerful, and when Queen Victoria died in 1901, her son Edward became king. He was called King Edward VI. Edward was friendly and loved to travel. He helped make peace with other countries. Edward VI's son George then he was called King George V. George V ruled during a difficult time called World War I. He changed the family name from House of Hanover to House of Windsor because England was at war with Germany, and he wanted a more English name. King George V had 2 sons. His eldest son, Edward, became king after him. Edward was called King Edward VIE, but Edward fell in love with a woman named Wallis, and because he couldn't marry her and remain king, he decided to give up this was called abdication. So Edward's younger brother George became king. He was called King George VI. King George VI didn't expect to be king, but he worked hard and was very brave. He led his country through World War II and was loved by many people. George VI had 2 daughters, and his eldest daughter Elizabeth became queen after him. Queen Elizabeth IA became queen in 1952. She worked very hard and traveled all over the world to meet people and help her country. She ruled for a very long time, and many people loved her. She had a son named Charles, and so the story of the House of Hanover continues with the House of Windsor, with new kings and queens ready to lead their country with courage and wisdom. Subscribe to my channel.